Imagine stepping into a medieval hut on a freezing January night. The air inside is so bitter that frost forms on the walls, and every gust of wind slices through the cracks like tiny knives. Strangely enough, peasants still manage to close their eyes, sleep through the night, and wake up alive. Without heaters, insulated windows, or even proper fireplaces, they discovered survival tricks that might surprise you. Their huts were death traps waiting to happen, yet families built systems of warmth so clever that modern science is only now beginning to fully explain them. One secret sat right under their feet. Peasants didn't just light fires in the middle of their huts like we usually imagine. Instead, many of them dug their hearths into the ground. These sunken fire pits turned the floor itself into a heating system. Instead of heat shooting upward and vanishing into the thatch roof, it spread sideways first, radiating across the hut like a warm tide. To make this system even more effective, they surrounded the pit with heavy stones. These weren't random rocks either. River stones were best because they could absorb hours of heat without cracking. Once heated, they worked like natural batteries, glowing with warmth long after the fire itself had gone out. Placement mattered too. Fires at the wall only warmed half the space. But when positioned in the center, the heat flowed evenly to every sleeping corner. It was survival by geometry. One carefully dug pit could mean the difference between a family waking up or never waking at all. There was another bonus. Underground hearths were far safer. Hidden below floor level, sparks and embers couldn't leap toward the fragile thatched roof. Even the wind couldn't scatter precious heat. It was all trapped, directed, and absorbed by the hut's design. A simple pit became an entire house heating system, built with nothing but rocks, dirt, and physics. But as warm as these underground fires were, peasants discovered there was an even smarter way to sleep, not on the floor at all, but above it. Peasants quickly realized that the warmest part of their huts wasn't near the floor at all. It was near the ceiling. Hot air naturally rises, and in a hut with a sunken hearth, this meant precious warmth collected right above everyone's heads. Instead of wasting it, families built wooden lofts and sleeping platforms high enough to capture that invisible pocket of comfort. Sleeping up there was like securing the best seat in the house, a few degrees warmer, sometimes enough to turn shivering misery into tolerable rest. The difference could mean survival. Children who lost heat faster were usually sent up to these platforms, while parents stayed below to tend the fire. Age and body size dictated sleeping spots in a family's own survival strategy. These lofts weren't solid boards either. Smart builders left small gaps between the planks so heat could drift upward while still giving a sturdy sleeping surface. Think of it as lying on a giant warm air grate, a crude but surprisingly effective way to keep the entire household layered in warmth. But even with the best positioning, rising heat alone wasn't enough. What peasants really needed was insulation directly under their bodies. And that's where their straw beds came in. When you picture a straw bed, you might imagine a thin, scratchy mat tossed on the ground. In reality, medieval straw mattresses were engineering marvels. They weren't flimsy. They were thick, bundled constructions, sometimes a foot deep. Each hollow straw stalk acted like a tiny thermos, trapping air and storing warmth. Multiplied thousands of times, it turned an ordinary pile of farm waste into a powerful natural insulator. Fresh straw always worked best. Old, crushed straw lost its air pockets and leaked warmth. Families often refreshed their mattresses each season, knowing survival could depend on it. On top, they layered wool or furs, stopping precious body heat from sinking downward. In colder regions, winter bedding was so thick that climbing into it felt like sinking into a lumpy but surprisingly cozy cloud. Some families built double or even triple layer systems. A straw mattress on the ground, another layer above it, and sometimes an air gap in between. That trapped pocket of air acted like insulation in a modern wall, preventing heat from escaping into the frozen dirt below. Drafts were the enemy. Even the best mattress failed if warm air slipped away at the edges. So peasants sealed sleeping areas with rolled cloth, creating barriers just like caulking around a window. Every seam mattered when the air outside could freeze skin in minutes. Sleeping arrangements became strategic. Families huddled together, placing the coldest members between the warmest ones. Body heat pooled, each person reinforcing the other. A single bed wasn't just bedding, it was a survival system, carefully layered and shared to trap heat long after the fire faded. But even the best mattress couldn't save you if your body itself kept leaking heat into the air. Even the warmest bed could fail if the human body itself was leaking warmth. Peasants learned this the hard way. Heat escapes fastest through the head, hands, neck, and breath, and they came up with ingenious solutions to seal every one of those leaks. Nightcaps weren't fashion statements. They were survival gear. Woolen hats pulled tight over the scalp and ears kept heat from rushing out of blood-rich skin. Without them, sleeping could feel like leaving a window open in the middle of winter. Hands, too, acted like radiators. That's why peasants wrapped them in cloth or wore simple mittens to trap warmth. Even makeshift wrappings prevented dangerous cooling that could spread through the whole body. Breathing was another problem. Every exhale sent hot air into the freezing night, while every inhale pulled icy air straight into the lungs. So peasants tied cloth over their mouths and noses, turning their own breath into a miniature heat exchanger. Outgoing warmth preheated the air coming in, recycling body heat instead of wasting it. The neck was another weak point, the body's chimney. To stop heat from funneling upward and out, people wrapped scarves and cloth strips tightly, creating a seal around one of the body's biggest escape routes. When you put it all together, caps, mittens, scarves, and breath warmers, it looked less like bedtime and more like armor. But that full body wrapping created a thermal fortress, trapping warmth so efficiently that families could last the night even after fires died. And still, sometimes even the best human preparation wasn't enough. That's when peasants turned to an unlikely heating system, their animals. For many families, survival in the dead of winter came with feathers, fur, and a few barnyard noises. Livestock weren't just food or labor. They were heaters. Chickens, goats, and pigs were brought right into the hut during the coldest nights, each animal acting as a living furnace. The math was simple. One pig could raise the temperature of a small hut by several degrees. Chickens huddled together like little heating units, multiplying their warmth. Goats and sheep added steady heat throughout the night. For peasants, these weren't pets. They were biological radiators. Placement mattered. Big animals went near the center, where their body heat reached everyone. Smaller animals clustered in corners, often near children. This way, warmth spread evenly without overcrowding. Their breath added another benefit: moisture. Unlike the dry, harsh heat of a fire, animal breath created humid warmth, which made the air easier to breathe. It was like having natural humidifiers running all night, preventing the painful dryness that winter air often brought. Yes, the smell was strong, and yes, the floors got messy. But when the choice was between stench and survival, the answer was easy. Families learned to tolerate barnyard odors in exchange for warmth, and often their very lives. In a sense, these huts were early examples of central heating, humans and animals sharing the same air, recycling each other's warmth, and creating a system far more reliable than fire alone. But even with animal heat, there was one last problem to solve: how to keep the fire alive until morning. Even with animals nearby and every body tightly wrapped, the fire itself still mattered. A hut without heat risked freezing the whole family before dawn. But wood was scarce, and tending flames all night wasn't always possible. So peasants mastered a technique called fire banking. Instead of letting flames burn out, they buried hot coals under thick layers of ash before bed. The ash acted like a blanket, smothering oxygen just enough to keep the embers alive but not fully burning. By morning, all it took was a breath of air and a few twigs to bring the fire roaring back to life. This method stretched limited fuel supplies dramatically. A single night's worth of heat could last twice as long, with embers glowing silently under their gray cover. For families on the edge of survival, that efficiency meant everything. The choice of fuel was crucial. Hardwoods like oak or hickory created slow, steady coals that stayed alive for hours. In some regions, peasants used peat, dense chunks of compressed plants that burned like natural coal, glowing all night from a single block. And there were innovations too. Clay pots filled with embers were tucked under stone slabs near beds, creating personal heaters that worked like ancient hot water bottles. They were risky. One mistake could burn down the hut, but when handled carefully, these glowing pots provided concentrated warmth right where it was needed most. Banking wasn't just a trick, it was a survival science passed down from parent to child. Every family member learned the balance. Too little ash, the fire burned out. Too much, and the embers suffocated. It was a delicate art, and mistakes could be deadly. But banking fire wasn't the only secret to surviving the night. How peasants slept itself was just as important. Unlike today, medieval people didn't always sleep straight through the night. Especially in winter, they often followed a rhythm called first sleep and second sleep. Here's how it worked. Families went to bed not long after sunset, slept for about 4 hours, then naturally woke around midnight. During this wakeful period, they tended fires, checked on animals, adjusted bedding, or simply sat in silence. Then, after an hour or two, they returned to bed for their second sleep until dawn. This schedule wasn't a sign of poor rest. It was perfectly adapted to survival. That midnight awakening meant someone was always awake to check the embers, add fuel if needed, or reposition family members closer to warmth. It prevented the disaster of everyone sleeping straight through while the fire died. Biology played along. Generations adapted so well that people often woke naturally, without alarm or effort. The coldest hours just before dawn lined up with the second sleep, meaning fresh fire tended at midnight carried them through the most dangerous stretch of the night. In a way, this segmented sleep turned every family into a self-sustaining survival unit, rotating fire watchers, shared body heat, and built-in checkups during the deadliest hours. What seems strange to us today was, for peasants, the difference between life and death. Medieval peasants weren't just stumbling through winters in misery. They engineered survival systems with every resource available, from underground fires and stone, batteries to straw mattresses, wool caps, animal furnaces, and careful fire banking. Even their sleep cycles adapted perfectly to the rhythms of survival. Taken together, these 7 methods transformed flimsy huts into surprisingly effective winter shelters. Families endured nights that would terrify us today, all without electricity, insulation, or central heating. And perhaps the most shocking part is this: they didn't just endure, they innovated. Their huts became living laboratories of survival, proving that with creativity and cooperation, even the harshest winters could be conquered. So next time you picture medieval peasants shivering in their huts, remember, they weren't helpless victims of the cold. They were survival engineers, crafting warmth out of nothing but earth, wood, animals, and ingenuity. And maybe, just maybe, they knew a few tricks modern people have long forgotten.